I'm Gian Volpicelli. You might have seen my face beforehand today with another title saying that I was essentially the boss of blockchain for Europe. I'm not. I'm a technology reporter, Politico Europe in Brussels. And today we're going to do something very interesting. We're going to talk about the Data Act and trying to focus on why it matters in terms of crypto. And there's a specific article that is about smart contracts. So that's, I suppose, the reason why it's being discussed here. But it's going to be a fantastic opportunity to learn about the amazing Data Act and what it actually is going to do for us and possibly for you as members, esteemed members of the blockchain community. Anyway, so we have a gobsmacking group of panelists accompanying us in this journey. So we have Federico Milani, who is the Deputy Head of Data Policy and Innovation at the European Commission. We have Marta Belcher of the Filecoin Foundation. She's the chair. We have Anna-Liisa Pärnalaas. She's a counselor on digital and cyber policy with the Estonian Permanent Representation Council. And Jeremy Rollinson, Senior Director, EU Government Affairs at Microsoft. I managed to say them all. Thank you very much for being here. So, the Data Act, if I understood it correctly, Federico, is supposed to be a piece of EU regulation that is going to make it much easier to share data and interoperability between various organizations in terms of data sharing and so forth. And I'm sure that's very simple. I'm also always simplifying, but I'd like to get a sense from you yourself as a functionary of the Commission, what the vision was there, and also whether you can at least try and tease out why this might be interesting to our audience, for our audience in terms of smart contracts and blockchain.
Yeah, thank you very much. And I excuse myself immediately because many things probably you've heard it from the previous speakers, their specialist, especially the Estonia from the Commission. But let's start from exactly from the beginning. So the Data Act is just a piece of legislation which is part of the European Data for Strategy, which has been adopted in 2020. So there are several actions that was part of it, and the vision is really to boost the data economy. And by boosting the data economy, what you need to do is really to boost the circulation of data, so the accessibility of data and the possibility of reusing data. In that respect, there has been several actions and legislation. The first one that I want to mention is the Data Governance Act that has been recently adopted, that is going to enter into force, where we are going, for example, to tackle the difficulties of trust that there is in sharing data. Data holders are usually very reticent in sharing the data because they do not know for which purpose the data is then going to be used. And users are again reticent because they fear that by using the data as they're supposed to do, or that as they want to do, they might get into trouble because it's not the way that we're using. So in order to create a market where this data can be shared, what we have foreseen is the possibility of creating a new actor, which we call the neutral data intermediary. So a broker basically that assures that the data is going to the right person, to the right users, and the data is making sure that a contractual agreement that is made available between the data holder and the data users might contain all the assurance that the data holder is giving the data for a specific purpose. So on DDGA, we have set up a number of requirements for the data intermediary to be defined as neutral and being registered as a data intermediary. Then there is the Data Act.
Right, getting there. Good, go on.
The Data Act is acting, exactly. The Data Act is then acting in another aspect, which is making possible that who can benefit the benefits of the use of data can be shared among the various actors in creating the data, and especially focusing on IoT data, and so in devices that use IoT and that store data. In that sense, what we want to do is that the data, the user of the device has got the right to get access to that data and give it to third parties that might offer services additional to what the manufacturer of the device is using. On the other hand, we do not want that the manufacturer lose entire control of the data, and therefore there has to be, again, a contract that needs to be established between the manufacturer and the data and the third party that is going to use this data. In this place now, if you think about major companies that might have a number of requests, Dirk was making as an example, the automotive industries. Smart contracts seems to us a way to speed up and reduce the resources required to achieve what the vision and the data act is saying.
Can I ask you how you define smart contracts? Because I read the definition, it's something that exists on an electronic ledger, but it's not necessarily a blockchain, is it? Or is it?
No, I don't think it is. So the definition is, as you said, in the ID, in the IDAS new proposals,
yeah,
and it's much broader. So
maybe more than blockchain.
Yeah.
Right. Okay. Sorry. Go on. So tell us about Article 30, which seems to be the
exactly. So again,
the punctum of the question
Article
here.
30, what Article 30 doesn't want to do is to regulate on smart contracts. What he wants to say and what he wants to put is a number of provisions that should be available in order to be able to stipulate a smart contract that has the characteristics that are necessary for sharing data.
Right, and I think that the most the provision, the parts of the Article 30 that are getting most people in crypto worried about the fact that there must be a way to safely terminate a contract in some cases, right?
Yeah,
right.
And the issue is simple.
And of course, a smart contract is theoretically supposed to be untakedownable. That's what I used to hear in London, untakedownable. So that's a bit of a big ask, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly. But what again, it probably depends also how we read it and how we how we read it. My reading of it is that a smart contract is data sharing can be stopped at any time by the three parties involved. So you can and you have the necessity to terminate the contract and to terminate the flux of data, for example.
Okay.
So you want to have this possibility.
Right, Federico, that's a great primer. Maybe we should now ask Anna-Liisa a bit about the way the council has been working on the proposal, and then maybe we can go back and forth with industry actors and Federico again, just to then possibly zero in on the blockchain aspect. So compared to the initial commission proposal, how has the council positioned itself? How has it been positioning itself? And what can you tell us about the work you've been doing?
Well, first, thank you for having me. I'm very happy to be
Welcome.
here and also maybe later on explain a bit more about our views on the proposal. But from the council perspective, I mean, we started working with the proposal quite early after it was published. So in spring, we had the first reading. We had actually quite many workshops also dedicated to the experts in capitals. So that was, I think, a very helpful also from the presidency, also from the commission side, to really explain further what's at stake and what are the practical implications of different provisions. Because I mean, in a way, it's a tricky file because it addresses quite many different angles of data economy. So they're kind of all piled together into one proposal. So yeah, it's quite. I mean, at first it's pretty difficult to understand.
Tell me
So
something
I
I don't
mean,
know.
it's not bad. I mean, per se, but it's difficult to understand the interplay also with existing regulations and other proposals that are on the table. So in this regard, it was super helpful. And over the summer, I mean, we have second compromise proposal on the table, so that we're actually going to discuss tomorrow. So over the summer, the presidency, I mean, they have done an excellent job so far. And I would say that the pace is quite good in which we are moving. But I mean, on essence and on the substance, I would say that no significant amendments have been made with regard to the direction in comparison to the initial proposal. So I would say that big focus has been on explaining further what is the interplay with existing regulations, making some clarifications here and there, making the text a bit more easier to understand or read. So I think this has been one of the key focus areas so far. But it's
Right. So
definitely
as Estonia, you are trying to make it more readable and more understandable.
I mean, it's also very important for us to have have it to be very clear how for example GDPR applies, or how can we ensure that trade secrets are
citizens.
yeah,
Oh, right,
or also from business point of view, if you have to make data available, we want to know that trade secrets are being protected. So it's, I mean, there are so many different angles, so that's why it's a bit
What's the areas of the proposal that you have mostly focused on, or which points are the ones that trigger the most debate, if any?
Yeah, I mean, it's a good question.
Maybe one or two.
I mean,
even one
from our point, I mean, for example, I think chapter 5, which addresses business to government data exchange.
All right.
So I guess that's
one.
Also very important for all the member states, for governments, but also for businesses. So I think it's this kind of chapter that really gets everyone's attention. So
yeah, of course.
Yeah.
How much time has been spent discussing Article 30 on smart contracts?
I mean, I have to admit, it hasn't really been a focus area for us, at least so far. So we might get inspired from this discussion here today.
Right. They feel loved enough by other actors, I suppose.
But I would say, that the most time has been spent on more controversial chapters so far. So that's chapter 5, for example, but also the first ones on making data available, IoT data. So it's that, I mean, we're still in the middle of the process, so it...
No, of course, yeah, makes sense. I mean, because smart contracts might be used for all these things, but they're not necessarily the only way to do that, right? So it's fair enough that they are there, but it's also fair enough that you don't spend all your time on it, or any time on it.
Yeah, so far we haven't spent all time on that. So.
No, it makes total sense. Maybe let's ask Marta. Marta, so I suppose you must have strong ideas about what the Data Act, and especially the Data Act's Article 30, might mean for you as a crypto company. So I use you as a mouthpiece of the whole crypto industry, the global crypto industry. So it's a big burden on your shoulders. Can you put the crypto position to our crypto audience and about what you think?
Sure, absolutely. I'm happy to talk about what I think here, and thanks so much for having me. It's great to be here with such amazing fellow panelists. And I think I want to start by saying that I completely and wholeheartedly agree with and like a lot of the ethos that is driving this bill. I think fundamentally the idea behind blockchain and cryptocurrency technology from the beginning has been to really shore up privacy and civil liberties. And I think that a lot of what's driving this bill is the same type of values overall about protecting people's privacy. And I think that's fantastic. I think when it comes to Article 30 that specifically is talking about smart contracts, I definitely think that there's some room for improvement as this moves through the process. I think that for me, just to I guess, zoom out a little bit further, really one of the most important things about this technology is that it creates the ability to program your money. And so when you talk about smart contracts, I really think that's a bit of a misnomer, because you think of smart contracts, you think maybe of legal contracts. And I think it really, when you call it a smart contract, it really doesn't fully communicate what this technology actually does. So for me, if you hear the word smart contracts, I think instead you should think of it as programmable money. So what this smart contracts, what programmable money allows you to do is write computer code that automatically transfers value on a condition being met. So one example is you could write a program on a computer that says, for every second of a song that I play on my computer, automatically transfer 1/1,000,000th of a cent from me to the songwriter, and 1/1,000,000th of a cent from me to the singer. And this can all happen instantly and automatically with no intermediary in between us, even across borders. It's completely a type of transaction that's just completely untenable using the traditional payment systems. And so that programmable money technology really enables all sorts of amazing potential.
I think you're preaching to the choir here, though, Marta. Everybody believes that here.
Well, I don't know about that. I think I hope that's the case.
Right.
I would love to be preaching to the choir. But I do think that fundamentally, it's important to emphasize that this technology has all sorts of amazing potential for really shoring up financial privacy, but also creating alternatives to big tech.
Okay.
Right. Fundamentally, that's what we're doing. And so I think for that reason, it's important to not want to break the technology, and to not want to introduce backdoors, and to not cause the technology to have to be fundamentally changed in order to be compliant.
And that's what you fear the act is possibly going to do.
Correct.
You're kind of hinting at it. I want you to be pointing exactly at what's wrong there. Can you give me a sense?
Sure, absolutely. So I think the idea of introducing effectively a kill switch of Article 30, Section 1B, which requires termination, the ability to terminate and interrupt smart contracts, I think it fundamentally, unfortunately, really misunderstands how the technology works and would require a lot of this technology to be much less effective. I think this is a lot like the debates that we've had in the United States and elsewhere about introducing backdoors to encryption technology.
Yeah.
Anytime you're introducing these types of these types of exceptions to the way that these technologies are supposed to work, you're actually fundamentally, first of all, altering the technology. But second, I think you're also altering the way in which sort of the safety and security of the entire system, because those types of backdoors can actually end up being exploited. These are things that actually create the ability to make these technologies less safe and less secure. And so
I mean, it's not like the crypto industry doesn't have a problem with exploits and hacks, but yeah, I guess it. I guess you're right.
That's the reason that we should want to be very careful to not create further potential for accidents.
No, absolutely, right? I get it.
Exactly.
Jeremy, I don't know how to bring you in this discussion. I suppose that maybe we should say, we should pick on what Marta said, which is that smart contracts are going to create a massive alternative to big tech. So you as Microsoft should be elated with this act.
Well, I would go back to what Federico said. Can everyone hear me? Okay.
Yeah.
I think this is really in the context of data sharing that the article is meant to address. So Federico's point earlier is an understandable one. You want to make sure that when a party decides to stop a data sharing arrangement, they have the power to do so. So I think you have to look at it in that context. I think where the confusion comes from is sometimes the words we use here, whether we talk of data sharing, I think that means a lot of different things.
Smart contract is questionably defined.
There you go.
I'd say.
That was where I would come to. So sometimes that creates confusion, but I do think it's important what Federico said earlier. This is meant to be seen not as a regulation of distributed ledger technology or anything like that. It's very much looking at the importance of smart contracts to facilitate data sharing and what needs to be taken into account.
How do you understand smart contracts yourself?
Smart contracts? Well, we have a number of solutions that we offer in that space.
I know, yeah.
Coming back to Marta's point, I look at this article, it's not one of, like my Estonian colleague mentioned, I don't think it's the number one thing that we're looking at.
Our colleague as a co-panelist. Right.
as a colleague in Brussels. looking
Yeah,
at Data Act,
all colleagues, of course.
we're all talking Data Act these days, and I look at it much more in the context of, will you have access to these type of services? And there are other chapters in the Data Act that you can't look at these articles in isolation, I think. There's so much of the Data Act from one chapter to the next that links, and again, as was said earlier, there's arguably several different legislative proposals in here. So if you think of interoperability requirements and the way that these work together, I think about Article 30 almost the way I look at some of the requirements in Chapter 8 on interoperability. We're a data processing service as defined in the proposal. We offer such technologies as part of our cloud offering. How will those be implicated here, including the blockchain type technologies and services that we provide to customers? Are they going to be implicated by what's happening in Chapter 7 with international safeguards that are going to be applicable to companies like ours? Are the interoperability requirements going to be there? So what type of access will our customers continue to have to some of those technologies? That's the bigger question, whether it's a smart contract offering, a distributed ledger technology, or just a cloud service all up.
Would you change it?
Would I change the
if you
Data Act?
could-
I think I
No.
probably would, yeah.
Article 30 specifically. Is it something you don't like either, like Marta doesn't?
I'm not close enough to it. I kind of come back again to what
Yeah, let's say
Federico
from an
said. I think-
intellectual point of view.
Well, I think you have to provide a degree of flexibility there. There are some technologies that can provide certain values that might not be consistent with what you have in mind in certain data sharing scenarios. But I do think what Federico said earlier is important. They're trying to look at ways to facilitate data sharing. Smart contracts can be a big part of that. But what does that word mean? What type of contracts? Will it work in all of those different scenarios? I don't think every technology is going to be applicable to every scenario, right? And so it's a challenge. It's tough.
It is. So I'd like to understand one thing about specifically the skill switch debate, Federico. Is it something that is supposed to be applying also to open source, non-proprietary blockchains? So are you going to require Ethereum, for instance, to have a kill switch in some cases? How would that work? Bring some clarity here.
So first of all, it's not a requirement, but I would like to ask a question or give an example that, again, Dirk was doing before. Let's suppose that you are a big company like BMW that already is receiving quite several thousand of requests based on Article 20 of the GDPR on getting access to the data.
Sorry, which question are you answering? Are you answering which one?
No,
Mine.
I wanted to ask a question. Yeah.
Ask a question.
Give an example. Yeah.
Right.
So let's do an example of the automotive industries. Now, the Data Act already the GDPR allows users of a car to get to the manufacturer and ask for the data that the car is collected. And from the beginning, where the data was sent sometimes by email, now the automotive industry has to put in place automatic systems to share the data. But that one is a one-off, and it's working with a one-off system. Now, let's suppose that the Data Act enter into force as it is. Now, me as citizens and owner, for example, of a car, might ask the manufacturer of my car to ship the data to my preferred garages, because I want that the data that he has full access of the data that is collected in order that he can provide me services. Now I can do it, and probably a smart contract, from what Marta was giving an example, could be a way of doing it and a way for the manufacturer to assure that the data is shipped to the right organization. But suppose that then I'm not happy about the service that I'm getting and I want to terminate the contract.
No, I get it. I'm just wondering whether that would apply to open source projects.
Yeah.
And how you do it technologically, because in some cases it's just hard to implement that. As Marta said, it seems to be, according to some people, I'm not sure it is, a defining trait of how blockchain technology works. So my question was, how do you see this working?
This is what we request, and we believe that there could be technical solutions that probably
like which
are not.
one?
But that one I'm not an expert to say. To say it.
I'm surprised.
Oh, sorry.
Who is the expert? Who should we ask?
Well, I've got some names, but they are not
Okay.
here. But I can write.
Please
but
pass
I'm
them
sure
later.
that I'm sure that there might be in the audience some expert that will be.
Okay, we'll ask the
But
audience
let
for a
me
solution.
let me no. But let me say one major point that has not been tackled right now.
Please.
Is that we are just asking for a certification. So we are asking for the vendor of this solution to certify that it's capable of doing that. We are
Right.
not imposing them to do that.
Okay, I see Marta
And the
shaking
second
her
thing-
head a lot. Do you want to jump in, Marta? I really want to see this kind of duking out.
Well, I don't know that I want to duke it out with anyone, but I would say that I do think as written, so I mean, just to read how it's written right now, I think, fundamentally, as we move through the process, I think there may be, the text may be cleaned up and changed over time, right? So I think that's part of this process. I mean, there's a discussion happening tomorrow about the text, right? So I think over time, the text will certainly improve. As the text is written now, what it says is, just to read it word for word, it says that a person whose business involves the deployment of smart contracts for others, et cetera, has to make sure that the following essential requirements are met. So I'm just going to read it to you. It says safe termination and interruption. Ensure that a mechanism exists to terminate the continued execution of transactions. The smart contract shall include internal functions which can reset or instruct the contract to stop or interrupt the operation to avoid future accidental executions. So I think that there may be intent for this language to be different in the future, but I think as it's written now, I don't think it's tenable.
Right. Do you think do you think it's fair, Federico?
As I was saying, I think that the concept that we brought forward is that concept. So it's increasing the trust of sharing data and the trust of sharing data through smart contract.
Right.
Now, well, there's going to be a discussion, as you said, and as you heard, the council is preparing their common position.
Yeah.
The parliament is discussing it. So there is room of maneuver to improve it, the text, and we will take into account again also the comments of the various parties involved.
Okay. Enough duking out. Anna-Liisa, from this discussion, what are your thoughts now as attaché to the council? Do you think this article should be discussed, maybe removed? Has this debate in any way changed your position on Article 30?
Yeah, well, I'm not going to take a stance on that if it should be deleted or not.
No, but what do you think? Yeah.
But I mean, it definitely looks like something we have to, look at. Yes. But if I might actually take this kind of like helicopter view,
Absolutely.
then to start with a positive note that sometimes we tend to forget. Because we are so focused on all the shortcomings and everything. So
yeah.
I think it's very good that the proposal is really, enhancing consumer rights and so on. So it's making more data available. But I think regardless of the chapter or the provision that we're discussing, I think the underlying principle is how can we, overcome these obstacles that we have today in our data economy, while we still, manage to keep the incentives for especially businesses to invest in different data-related products and services, and also, as Federico just very well pointed out, how can we ensure trust from the citizens' point of view?
No, yeah, absolutely.
So I think these are kind of, this very, they might seem abstract, but I think it's kind of, it's underlying principles in every provision. So
no, absolutely. I'm just curious about how it will work feasibly technically. That's my word.
Yeah, that's always
the way this, the way technology and definition clash worries me a bit that it's not going to be technically implementable. Maybe it is.
That's always the question for us also. First, what are the practical implications? We can read the provision, but maybe always we don't really, see behind. And I think with every obligation or requirement that we add to the regulation, we have to see that it's proportionate, that it's really, it's effective, it's not too burdensome. So it's always this kind of, the exercise of finding the right balance. So it might sound like a cliche, but it's, I think that's the case. So,
Jamie, add some words of wisdom here.
Well, I certainly agree that there are parts of the text beyond Article 30 that feasibility will be challenging. Right? So is this feasible? I think everyone does agree, most, if not all folks agree on where we're trying to go with this, what the aims of the proposal are. We certainly agree with those aims. But then when you get to the how, that's where we start to have these discussions, right? And will that work in practice? I do think some of this has been sold a bit oversimplified. And when you start to read the text and you ask what these words mean and you compare that to the way the technology is delivered, you do run into some obstacles. And it's going to be really hard to see how some of this works in practice.
Right. And should we start taking questions? How does it work? Is it time to start taking some questions? We have 10 minutes to go.
Just to be provocative, but wasn't it
Please.
this discussion, wasn't it the same one that we had when the GDPR was adopted?
Right. Go on, please elaborate.
So the point is that also when the GDPR was adopted, there has been quite a number of people that were saying, well, it's not possible to put it in practice. But then we found solution that for the citizen are extremely important, because then they've got a much more the feeling that and the trust that their privacy is actually taken into account and it is preserved. So again, the Data Act most probably is something that where we are moving into a field where data sharing and this type of activities are relatively in an infant stage. And so probably the technology as well will have to adapt to what are the basic principles that we want to put. And then we agree it seems we agree that
it seems very insurmountable at this point. But yeah, I confide there will be a technical fix. The only difference I see right now is that now this kind of lamentations seem to come mostly from open source projects as opposed from big tech. So that's one thing I would underline in terms of differences between the GDPR and the current debate, which is only today about a specific article, Federico. I'm not debating the whole Data Act, which is, I'm sure contains many more, as we heard from Jeremy, many more provisions about many more interesting topics. But today, of course, we are Blockchain for Europe, and we have to try and talk about it. Tommaso, shall we? I don't know if there are questions. I haven't seen any on my Slido. Is there anyone who wants to ask our prize panelists a question? Yeah, I see a hand over there. Name and affiliation, please, and then your question.
Hi, my name is Aldrich. I'm ex-Rockaway. And my question is, can you summarize in 3 sentences how Data Act would actually influence or impact Bitcoin or Ethereum?
Who's the question for?
Maybe Federico.
Okay, Federico, and maybe Marta. So we have two sides of the same coin. Federico, do you have a take on this, on whether the Data Act will have an impact for open source blockchains such as Bitcoin and Ethereum? Is there going to be an impact there?
Well, from what I know, for example, Ethereum is capable of implementing smart contracts. So again, going back to the example of Marta, there might be, since we are talking about access and sharing data, which means also trading data, it could be an application, again, that Ethereum can develop in setting up a system or a smart contract that allow a company to pay for data to a data provider. So there can be an impact to the entire industry and as well into the industries of Ethereum and Bitcoin. So
right.
That is my take. Now, is it implementable as we were discussing before?
That's a big question,
is the
right?
requirement that is a big question, and well, we'll have to look closely into it, and probably the specialist of the Article 30, that, as I was saying,
that's a growing field of study.
I have a really answer, but I don't have it.
Marta, what's your take?
Yeah, so the thing that the language that I'm most concerned about making sure gets changed specifically because I'm worried about the way that it would affect these types of open source technologies, including Ethereum, is the language in Article 31B that says that that we need to quote, ensure that a mechanism exists to terminate the continued execution of transactions, right? So fundamentally, that is the language of this article and of this act, where I'm concerned about that being implementable for Ethereum and all smart contract technologies.
So if I just want to ask a brief follow-up question before asking, but what do you think the consequence would be? Because of course, these blockchains can't just be shut down unless you shut down the internet. So is it in terms of affecting ramps, off ramps and on ramps? What do you think what would we see in your opinion?
Well, I think that'd be a great question for Federico, but I think fundamentally the idea that these very important open source technologies would suddenly be potentially non-compliant in certain circumstances, I think is problematic, and how that actually gets enforced and who that gets enforced against, I think is an important question that also, I think comes down to what the enforcement of the act looks like.
Right. Unless Federico wants to come, he wants to come back. He was opening his mouth. Go on.
No, I wanted just to ask then, how would you write the specific Article 31.b?
I would cut it. I would cut 31.b.
Right.
And then how do you assure that the data holder will have the possibility of interrupting the contract and so on, therefore the flux of data?
I wouldn't. To be clear, my position is that there should be no kill switch.
Code is law according to this kind of ethics.
No.
That isn't.
That's not what I'm saying. I'm not.
No. That's what I'm saying. Yeah. Okay. Right. I get it.
Then that one will limit normally the user application of the smart contracts for data sharing.
Right. We're getting some questions, but they're not really questions. They're just statements. So in the meantime, let's see whether there's anyone else who is willing to ask a question that is a question, ends up with a question mark. Is there anyone? Otherwise, I'll have to ask the...
Maybe I'll just ask a question.
Oh, wow,
Starting
Tommaso,
here,
wow.
Why
That's
not?
not
I've
inside
been
the baseball
moderating
at all.
the whole thing for a couple of days. But thanks again, everybody, for actually joining this discussion. My question is actually, I think one of the concerns that the blockchain industry has on this is that indeed, now we're talking about smart contracts for a specific purpose, right? So this is really in the data sharing framework and agreements. But what happens then if this kind of provision, this kind of language, this kind of requirements on smart contracts, as they will be on an official legislative proposal, what happens when these are just taken, copy-pasted in another legislative proposal that is not just limited to the context of the Data Act? And that is a bit the concern that some of our members of Blockchain for Europe have raised, because it can make sense right now, as we're discussing, to have this kind of requirements when smart contracts are developed specifically for data sharing agreements. But what happens then if we agree on these stacks, we agree on these requirements in the Data Act context, but then these are just taken and translated somewhere else?
So what's your question, Tommaso? I put it in a question form.
Well, Federico, that's the question. Like, is there a risk for this to happen? Is there a risk that this kind of language on smart contracts end up in other pieces of legislation that don't have anything to do with the data sharing economy?
I mean, likely, right? Are going to be quoted somewhere.
How can I say no? There's not that risk. So it's not in my hands. It's not in the hands of the current unit that is preparing the Data Act and is following the process. It's not in the hands of the Council and the Parliament. We will have to, for sure, we will have to make sure that if it is going to be reused or applied, it's done in an applicable way or it's done in a sound way, which is what we always do by having a very detailed process of having all the parties involved when we are preparing in the Commission a legislation. And then again, we are just preparing the legislation. It's going then to be discussed with the Council and Parliament. But apart from that, who can say no on what is your concern?
I mean, yeah, obviously might always be quoted in some other... I think actually the definition of smart contract hinges on a another term, which is in the, as Federico pointed out, EIADAS, right? So yeah,
Exactly.
it is a big
This is
mosaic of
what-
stuff.
Exactly. This is exactly what we are doing in order to avoid that changes on because as the EIDAS is being discussed right now, and
Yeah.
it's again it's not adopted. In order to avoid to have two different type of definition of smart contracts and ledger, we quoted the other legislation, and this is usually the approach. But again,
Right. Any other question? No. Okay. Shall we call it a day, Tommaso? We're already late when we started.
Yeah, I mean, we had a very interesting discussion. Unless the panelists want to add any other final words.
Yeah, let's have that's a very good way of closing it.
You're welcome.
So let's start from here, though. Anna-Liisa, give us some final remarks.
Yeah, big blockchain expert as I am.
No, maybe on anything. That's on the
I mean,
data.
it definitely seems very heated discussions, so I will take it with me as homework. So it's very, very interesting also to hear. I mean, especially from a member state perspective. So yeah, definitely something that we.
Is Estonia bullish on blockchain? Is it like Estonia really into blockchain technology? Does it
I mean,
want
yeah. I mean, in a way, yeah. We have, of course, implemented this in our different public sector solutions that we have today. So yeah.
So it's something close to Estonia's heart in a way.
Yeah, kind of. Yeah, I mean, there are different use cases here
No,
and there.
of course.
So yeah, but I mean,
Good.
yeah, but overall, I think the discussions in council and of course also in the parliament have not finished yet. So it's good opportunity
We are
for
talking
everyone
about something
to,
written on the water. Essentially.
Yeah, nothing.
Right.
So nothing's agreed until it's agreed. So yeah.
Reminds me of Michel Barnier's statement about Brexit. Jeremy, give us some pairs.
I would encourage this industry and those operating these type of technologies not to only focus on Article 30. I think there's a lot more implications throughout the Data Act that you may want to also consider.
Oh wow, that's ominous. Marta, what's your final take?
I would just say, I think that the entire blockchain and crypto industry, really, the fundamental ethos of the space is very aligned, again, with the ethos of what the act is trying to accomplish. And so really, I think we're quite aligned with this idea of data protection and privacy protection. That's really sort of at the heart of what this technology does. So I think overall, completely aligned in many ways with what this act is trying to accomplish. And I think, over time, the text of any act is going to evolve and, make sure that, and, I think, policymakers have done, phenomenal job making sure that what actually ends up in the act is ultimately tenable. And I have no doubt that what ultimately ends up here will also be tenable and implementable for the blockchain cryptocurrency industry in future drafts.
Fantastic. Federico, you got a lot of stick tonight, but thank you very much for, of course, being here and at least taking the stick. Give us your final comment on the whole shebang.
What I would say is that, in my opinion, as we wrote it, it's a big the Data Act and the development of the data economy and promoting access to data and data sharing. It could be a great opportunity of for the blockchain and for the blockchain industries. Now, imagine the Data Act without Article 30 and without mentioning of ledger technology for data sharing. Would you be happier about that? Or is it a way to promote, as I'm saying, new technologies? And then, okay, Article 30 has got some difficulties that can be, in my opinion, be an engineer, submarted or, sold out by technology or by developing or improving the technology in the future.
So there is room for improvement, but we are all going to win in the end. Okay, well, thank you, everyone, and thank you. It was a pleasure to host this panel. Thank you. Bye.
Thank you really for the great discussion. Thank you, Federico, for being with us and bearing with all these questions. Marta for connecting from the US, but also Anna-Liisa and Jeremy for being great panelists as well on this complicated topic. Well, that actually brings us to the close of this 2-day conference. So first of all, a big round of applause again for our last panelist. Thank you. Thanks again, guys. And at this point, I guess I have the honor also to thank you all for participating in this 2-day conference. This is our annual summit, and now we are very happy to be able to do it in person again. So obviously, we will hope to see you all next year. Thank you also for everybody that joined us online. A lot of questions arriving our way. Just to remind everybody, we will post the recording of all these sessions on our YouTube channel. So make sure to follow us on YouTube, on Twitter, on LinkedIn, whatever it is. But let's actually, I think the one main takeaway from all of this, I will say, is there is a lot to do, a lot of things coming our way, different legislative files, different proposals, different debates that we really need to tackle. So we are glad to see so many people interested in the future of the crypto and blockchain industry in the European Union. So if you want to be part of this conversation, if you want to be involved, and help us actually achieving our common goals, please reach out to us. We're Blockchain for Europe, trade association here representing the sector. So thanks everybody again for joining. Thanks also for to all the QED team and the venue, the great venue that hosted us in these 2 days. Thank you also for the great work for our team. And that's it. Thanks a lot. Bye.